But number 5 is definitely my favorite of the entire bunch. So you're looking to find one single paint color for all the walls inside your home, but you're sick of gray. Well, not to worry, because this is going to be a gray-free video, at least in the traditional sense. Stick with me. Gray has gone through some ups and downs in interior design, mostly ups, but most recently, downs. And I do pay attention to the comment section, believe it or not, where there are a lot of people that want an all-purpose interior paint color that isn't one of those almost cement-colored grays. So I gathered 5 from Sherwin-Williams that I like to use for clients that want something a little bit different. Now, just as a disclaimer, because these colors are different, they're not going to be for everyone, because not everyone dislikes gray as much as some of you watching. But all 5 of these Sherwin-Williams colors are still relatively neutral, but they're also far enough away from gray, in my humble opinion. And then also, in my humble opinion, I think it would do you wonders in the good karma department to hit the like button as we get into some of these colors. Really appreciate it. The first color we're talking about today is in the off-white category, and it's called pearly white. Pearly white definitely has some warmth to it, although not in your traditional creamy, beigey, yellowy sense. It has a touch of gray, just a touch, and it also leans a little more towards a red undertone versus a green one, which gives you the appearance of kind of the lightest brown you've ever seen. It's just a touch taupey for an off-white. That's a term that I like to use a lot. It was also featured in a Sherwin-Williams color collection called Cool White, which is interesting because it definitely still feels warmer rather than cool, but compared to a color like Honeyed White, it's feeling way cooler than that. So I guess it's all about your perspective and context. Now I wanted to present an off-white color option first because it seems to be a great default for a lot of people. When you're going with something this light, it's not going to have as much saturation because there's just less color in it. And this means you can incorporate it a lot easier into different color schemes. It's also not too light where it'll look like your walls aren't finished. And it has a light reflectance value of 77, which is still pretty light for a paint color, but not necessarily light enough for it to feel like a pure stark white. As an all over the house color, I try not to go much lighter than something like pearly white, because depending on the lighting of your room, lighter whites can look a bit washed out, and the dark corners can appear a bit muddy and discolored. So pearly white. Starting off with an easy one. We're now transitioning to an even warmer color with even more depth in natural linen, also by Sherwin-Williams. In fact, all these colors are by Sherwin-Williams. And this is your beige category. I keep telling you folks, okay, beige is back. And I think a large part of it is how it's being utilized in 2022, or the future if you're watching it in the future. By throwing a color like natural linen on your walls, combining it with really modern elements surrounding it, it transforms what would have been a builder's beige 15 years ago into a beautiful beige that is fresh, modern, but still cozy and inviting. And that's one of my favorite things about beige. It just has this enveloping home kind of feeling. This color is a little bit darker with an LRV of 66, but that's still plenty light enough to be able to throw it on your walls throughout your entire home. Doesn't matter what kind of lighting you surround it with, it will never really feel too dark, in my opinion. It's cozy and inviting, and when you're putting a color all over your home, that's kind of something you might want to project from room to room. It definitely has that warm feeling which makes your home inviting, and that's a big reason that I think it's a great color for stagers and investment properties. As a color, it is a pretty standard light tan that we actually recently did on a color code episode that a lot of you seem to really enjoy, so don't yell at me for putting a beige on here, please. It's not gray at least. Now we're going to start introducing some specific color hues to these otherwise neutral colors, and this color is maybe the closest one to gray on the list, but I would not classify it as such on its own. It starts with maybe a base of gray, but it is fused with a silvery, icy mauve that transforms it completely. The color is called Veiled Violet, and it is the darkest color out of the 5. It has a touch of purple and almost a touch of a desaturated brown, which gives it a slight taupe feeling to it, and it just feels a little bit sophisticated and upscale. A really great alternative to your more traditional, cooler grays that maybe lean a little more towards the blue side of things. Because this isn't just purple and gray, you do have that earthy quality to it, which gives it a touch of warmth and coziness. That's kind of a theme here, and that makes it a pretty good choice, at least an interesting choice, for all over your home. Just as a little side note, however, if you feel that this color is maybe a bit too dark for your space, especially in certain rooms that have zero natural light, you can always use one of its close neighbors like Sensitive Tint, and that shares a lot of the same qualities, but it's just a bit lighter and more airy feeling. Although because of that, its undertones aren't going to be quite as prominent, and therefore it could look a little more like a gray, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid, right? Color number 4. This is definitely more of a wild card, but I have seen it used all over the main parts of a home, and it looks good. Not necessarily meshing with my personal sense of style today. The color is called Silent Ripple. And yes, this is a slightly muted, powdery sky blue that has very little gray in it. You could call it a tint of blue because it does have a bit of a milky quality to it. But because this is so clearly a blue, you have to think of it a little bit differently than you would a neutral color like gray. Neutrals tend to blend into the background, especially when you use them on your walls, and this allows certain colors to pop in the form of your furniture and your accessories and your overall decor. But when you pick a color that is actually a color, it starts to become a little more of the main player, or at least a subtle accent color that draws the eye a bit more, kind of like in this case. So instead of having something super neutral on your walls, maybe the color of your curtains or your couch or your area rugs, those can take a little more of a muted or desaturated approach to blend in a bit better. I've also seen people play with opposites where they introduce a lot of warm creams in conjunction with light blue. So you have this warm and cool back and forth. It also has a lot to do with how big your walls are or how much visible space they're taking up, because if you're someone that has a lot of built-ins or big curtains, giant mirrors, or lots of pieces of artwork, you may not actually see much of that light blue color, and then it definitely behaves more like a little accent color rather than the dominant color in your color palette. So probably the most polarizing one, but it's definitely a fun choice. But I would say my personal favorite of the entire bunch is not quite greenish, but it's more of a green-a, or a combination of green and gray, and that is sea salt. It is a beautiful color that was featured in a Sherwin-Williams color collection called Rejuvenation, and it has an almost minty, kind of cool pistachio coloration that is at the same time pretty subtle. I find this color to be easier to implement on larger scales throughout an entire home, and it's because it has that duality of being a green that is both cool and warm, although maybe a hint more cool in my opinion. It's also a relatively flexible color in terms of its depth, or its LRV, at 63, so that puts it at the lighter end of mid-tone colors, which is kind of my preferred color range for those all over the house main colors. I'm sure I don't have to tell you how great sea salt is because it's quite popular, and yes, we did talk about it on an episode of Color Code that you can check out right here. It's also a video where I have way less facial hair, rocking the beard.